Welcome to my scientifically informed insider look at mental health topics. If you find this video to be interesting or helpful, please like it and subscribe to my channel. Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today I'll be answering a number of questions concerning a company called Betterhelp. We see that on YouTube recently there's been a lot of drama specifically around this platform. It's a platform that connects mental health providers, mental health clinicians, with clients. There have been a number of questions, and I'll go over these separately, but to give you an example of some of the questions, we see this claim that Betterhelp is a scam. I'll be talking about that. Claims that Betterhelp is not effective, claims that the clinicians aren't qualified, and a few others. So a variety of claims we've seen on YouTube channels and other social media, and I'll be discussing these in detail. Now, to start with, I want to indicate that I have no financial or business relationship with Betterhelp. I'm not one of their clinicians. My channel is not sponsored by Betterhelp. I spoke to the CEO, Alan Matas, to prepare for this video, and there were a few emails before that just to line up that conversation. But other than that, I don't know anybody at Betterhelp. For those that watch my channel regularly, you know that this channel is about scientifically informed content about mental health, and I don't offer anything but my reasonable interpretation of evidence and sometimes my opinion. So for example, I don't engage in personal attacks on people, including other YouTube content creators. Also, given the nature of this particular video, I want to mention that if you search my name on Google, for example, you'll see that I'm the current president of the Delaware Board of Mental Health and Chemical Dependency Professionals. But I'm not operating in that capacity for this video, and I have not operated in that capacity for any of my videos. I have a PhD in counselor education and supervision. I'm also a licensed professional counselor of mental health, a licensed chemical dependency professional, a certified advanced alcohol and drug counselor, and a national certified counselor. So I have a lot of experience on these issues, and I hope to bring some clarity to all this discussion we've seen around Betterhelp. So normally what I do with my channel is I receive questions from subscribers, I receive questions from people via email, and even sometimes in person. But I've never received as many questions for one single topic as I have for this topic about Betterhelp. I remember recently for a topic on borderline personality disorder, I received about 50 or 60 requests in about a month. For Betterhelp, I received over 100 in less than a month. So that may not be a lot for a large YouTube content creator, but for me that's fairly significant. And I wanted to make sure that I answered these different questions and concerns. These questions came from viewers, subscribers, other mental health professionals, and many individuals who didn't even see the YouTube videos that started this controversy. So somebody saw the video and mentioned it to somebody, and then they asked me a question about it. So to answer all these questions and concerns, and to add something meaningful to the discussion, I reached out to Alan Matas. He's the CEO of Betterhelp. He agreed to talk to me, which I thought was very generous, and we had a conversation that lasted about 90 minutes. I also looked at their website. I looked at a number of other websites related to this issue. I consulted the research literature and talked to some other people that were familiar with Betterhelp. They had experience with the service. So there's a lot of information to present here, and there's different strategies, of course, for organizing information like this. But I decided to organize this in terms of the concerns. So I'm going to go through each of the concerns individually, and some of them, of course, have some overlap, but there are pros and cons to any way you organize information. So I thought this made sense for this type of video. So first, the concern of the YouTube drama. And this specifically refers to what's been referred to as the Betterhelp scam. These accusations or claims that Betterhelp is a scam and not a legitimate business that's here to help people. So this all started because Betterhelp sponsors some YouTube channels, which is a fairly normal activity for a company like Betterhelp. A feud broke out between originally two YouTube content creators, and then Betterhelp was dragged into this, and then other content creators started making videos about this topic, but they offered little in the way of new evidence. I refer to this as chasing the trend, and this is fairly common on YouTube. I don't really have a problem with people chasing trends, but I worry about when they chase these trends and don't have anything meaningful or interesting to add to the discussion. And that's what seems to have happened here. So we see that a lot of information in these videos was presented as factual, but there's not a lot of evidence to back this up. Now, under this concern of the Betterhelp Scam question, one of the main issues was about the terms and conditions we see on the Betterhelp website. Specifically, a reference that's now been eliminated that indicated that Betterhelp was not responsible for verifying licenses. Also, there were some other passages that were singled out because of poor grammar, because they weren't clear, and because they seemed to be repetitive. So this is certainly poor wording. I read the terms and conditions both before and after the change, and I think it's a good point. If we think about terms and conditions, we would expect economy of expression and clarity, and really we don't see either one of those in these terms and conditions. Now, I talked to Mr. Matas about this terms and conditions issue, and they are working to improve the terms and conditions, and they took out that piece that bothered people, that piece that was featured in those videos. They're trying to rewrite them so they're more friendly, and they're really looking at every clause. He also noted that because they made the effort to change the wording that was attracting attention, it almost made them look guilty, like they had something to hide. Now, really, when we think about terms and conditions, I compared their terms and conditions to many others, and other than that poor wording, as I indicated, a lot of times these terms and conditions are heavily weighted in favor of the company. Now, I'm not a lawyer, of course, but we see a lot of clauses here that seem to talk about limiting the liability to a company. That seems to be fairly normal, and what bothers me about this particular accusation in terms of, as a scientist looking at evidence, it's not so much that the terms and conditions weren't perfect, but rather it was the conclusions that were drawn from these terms and conditions. It seems like a very large leap to move from poorly worded terms and conditions to scam. There's a lot of evidence that would have to be present there in the middle and be interpreted, and that simply wasn't happening. As I mentioned, the YouTube content creators that pointed this out, I think made a good point, but the conclusions do seem to far outweigh the evidence that's available. The next concern is this idea that YouTube content creators own Betterhelp, or there's a conspiracy between Betterhelp and the YouTube content creators, and everyone's making millions of dollars, and all these different claims. This is something I don't want to spend a lot of time on. There's simply no evidence to support this. It's fairly clear from even a brief search on the internet who owns Betterhelp, how they're structured. They're not owned by any YouTube content creators. There's no evidence of a conspiracy there. As I mentioned, Betterhelp does sponsor some YouTube channels, but again, that's fairly normal, and it'd be very hard to stretch that out into some sort of conspiracy theory. The next item is the item around bad reviews. Now, in this one, we see that this is really weak evidence, and I would say that about good reviews as well. Reviews are anecdotal. These are not gathered in a scientific way, so you could have people creating fake accounts and making both positive and negative reviews. So really, I just disregard this whole argument as being based on weak evidence, and really I don't want to entertain it much further than that. If there was some sort of systematic method of gathering this evidence, and we saw a large proportion of bad reviews, that would be different. Now, if somebody does want to evaluate this evidence, which again I would caution against, there are actually many more good reviews than bad reviews. The next concern or claim is that the clinicians that are associated with Betterhelp aren't real or they aren't licensed. And again, there's just simply no evidence to support this claim. Betterhelp does list each and every clinician on their website, and they list their qualifications as well. These are a matter of public record, by the way. Anybody can check these licenses. And even though the terms and conditions indicates that Betterhelp isn't responsible for doing that, and again, that's a good point, Mr. Matas confirmed that there are people at Betterhelp that do work to verify licenses on a daily basis. Now, I searched a number of the clinicians on the Betterhelp website. I didn't find anybody who didn't have a license. I looked at about 50, and there are several thousand, so that's important to keep in mind. And I really didn't find any problems with the descriptions I read either, the biographies that were listed in there. A few grammatical errors and some sentences that really didn't make sense, but nothing systemic. There were a couple of clinicians out of several thousand, again, that listed doctoral candidate in the description. I'm not a big fan of that strategy. When representing oneself to the public, I think it's safer to just go with the credentials that are complete. For example, if you have a license, then indicate that license. A doctoral candidate is somebody who's in the process of earning a doctorate, like a PhD, for example. So that's not a completed step. So it's not really, as far as I know, a legal or ethical issue or anything like that. It's just something I wouldn't do. The next claim we see in all this YouTube drama is this idea that BetterHelp rejects clients. So individuals come to BetterHelp and they get turned away. So just as an important point here, this happens in traditional face-to-face therapy as well. So I think most clinicians want to be helpful, but sometimes their skills or their modality doesn't align with what a client needs. According to Mr. Matas, BetterHelp rejects about 15% of the individuals that attempt to become clients or customers. Now again, these would be people that, if they were accepted, would pay the fee. They would become customers and that would result in earnings for BetterHelp. But they reject them because they acknowledge the limitations of the modality. There's online counseling available at BetterHelp, like video conferencing, and also live, so synchronous texting, and also asynchronous texting. So sending a text message and then getting another text back at a different time. So with this type of online modality, it is important to recognize limitations, and they make rejection decisions based on an automated process as well as clinicians making an assessment. And according to Mr. Matas, they look particularly closely at post-traumatic stress disorder and addiction as being areas that might not be completely suitable for their type of modality, the type of modalities their clinicians use. Now this resonated with me in particular because I happen to spend a lot of time working with post-traumatic stress disorder and of course working with addiction. And I recognize these are areas that require special training. So actually it seems fairly responsible to me that they would refer those clients to another treatment provider. Remember, when they say they reject 15% of the potential customers, they're turning them down from their service, but they are referring them to someone who's qualified. They're just not abandoning those individuals. The level of care, the type of care those people need has been determined to be different than what they can meet at BetterHelp. The next area of concern is that the clinicians associated with BetterHelp don't diagnose. Now I had concerns with this point as well, and I brought it up to Mr. Matas, and he answered it fairly directly. The clinicians at BetterHelp assess, but they don't give an official diagnosis. Again, this is acknowledging the limitations of online counseling. There are a few reasons why they determined it was a good idea to not diagnose. Among these reasons would be that there are a number of people that are trying to get a diagnosis for emotional service dogs. Also, there are a number of people who are court ordered, and of course the clinicians with BetterHelp can't appear in court, so that really doesn't work. And also there are a number of individuals, and this appears to happen on a fairly regular basis, that are looking for a specific diagnosis of depression, and they want that diagnosis to be made as if an employer caused it. So I have seen these different things in practice as well, and this does make sense. So BetterHelp stays away from diagnosing to avoid some problems. Again, there's no perfect position for them here, but they had to make a decision here one way or the other. To me, this seems reasonable. The next claim is that the clinicians at BetterHelp have a high no-show rate. And what this means is for like the video conferencing type service. So somebody makes an appointment to talk to their clinician, they sign on to their mobile device, their tablet, their PC, whatever they're using, and the clinician simply isn't there. Actually, with BetterHelp, this happens less than 5% of the time, which is fairly close to what we see in traditional agency therapy. The way we see it at agencies, though, is that somebody misses the whole day. So they have 7 clients scheduled to provide counseling to, and they call out sick at the last minute. So that can add up. That would be 7 people that would show up, and their clinician wouldn't be there. Although sometimes at agencies, they can be referred temporarily to another clinician. But either way, this percentage, less than 5%, is fairly consistent with what I've seen. BetterHelp does track these no-show events that do occur, and they contact the clinicians and try to work through what's going on, what may have interfered with showing up to therapy. The next area of concern is that clinicians at BetterHelp aren't free to exercise clinical judgment. So there's this idea that they're kind of tied in with BetterHelp and they have to follow the BetterHelp rules, and that interferes with their clinical judgment. So they have a license, they're qualified to practice, and somehow BetterHelp is intruding on that clinician-client relationship. Well, if we look at the evidence available, we see that with BetterHelp there's no penalty for taking a client or referring a client to another provider, which I find interesting because even with face-to-face therapy environments, traditional face-to-face therapy, a lot of agencies frown on clients being taken by clinicians. For example, if a clinician leaves to go to a private practice, they really shouldn't be taking their clients with them in a lot of cases. Now, in terms of referring a client, that's fairly normal. You're supposed to refer clients when it's indicated. The next issue is the issue of text therapy. And we see a lot of different concerns around this. We see claims that it's illegal, that it's unethical, and that's ineffective. So these words can get thrown about kind of loosely. It's important to understand that anything can be illegal, unethical, or ineffective in the inappropriate context. For example, somebody could say that surgery is illegal, unethical, and ineffective. And they would be right if it's conducted by somebody who isn't a licensed and qualified surgeon. So can text therapy be all of those things? It can be, but it's not illegal and it's not unethical when it's delivered by a licensed and qualified mental health clinician. Now, in terms of the ineffective claim, there are really mixed results here. We see some evidence that it can be effective, and we see some evidence that there may be some difficulties with it. But really, with this piece, we need more information. We really don't know about the effectiveness thoroughly like we do about traditional face-to-face therapy. I brought this point up to Mr. Matas, and this was one of my primary concerns, one of the reasons I really wanted to talk to him. And he indicated something that actually surprised me. With BetterHelp, there is no option for just text therapy. They offer and prefer that clients use text-amplified therapy. So they use the text therapy if they want to, but they also use the video conferencing, the online component. So I found this somewhat reassuring. And again, I have my doubts about text therapy, but I found this to be reasonable. One thing in particular that Mr. Matas indicated about this I found to be interesting was that BetterHelp, in a good way, is actually the least innovative platform. They're there for convenience, and they're not trying to reinvent therapy. We see other attempts being made at some other places to use AI, machine learning, and to really rely on peer support. And all of those are certainly interesting, but more controversial than traditional therapy. So we have a mix here of technology with the online component and traditional therapy. Now, given all this, I still have my concerns. My primary concern is that text therapy doesn't run too far ahead of what we know from science. But it does take somebody, like BetterHelp or some other companies, to try text therapy. Researchers aren't going to found companies to test out this modality. Somebody has to try this, and then researchers have to jump in and study it. And Mr. Matas was clear that he supports research on text therapy and on online therapy in general. So what can we learn from all this YouTube drama and all of these different claims? Well, other than some poor wording on the terms and conditions and a few other minor things, none of the negative claims against BetterHelp seem to be founded in any evidence. And I think this actually speaks more clearly about the nature of social media as opposed to anything about BetterHelp. Social media right now seems to be like the Wild West. How we get and process information is changing rapidly. Responsible behavior and critical thinking don't seem to be keeping pace with how much growth we see with social media. Just because a video or a post or whatever has a lot of views doesn't mean it's true. We know that if somebody's seeking views, there's a real incentive there for drama. And these large YouTube content creators run multi-million-dollar companies. They're competitive, they're sharp, and they really know how to get people to click on their videos. It's a high-stakes game. Largely, there's no disincentive for inaccurate information or for drawing conclusions not supported by the evidence. So think about this from a perspective of somebody serving on a jury. If you were an engineer and you were accused of using bad calculations to design a bridge, maybe that bridge collapsed or failed, would you want somebody on the jury that would take into account that you failed a third-grade math test? That's what's really happened here. We see small bits of evidence being magnified into conclusions that simply can't be supported. This isn't science, and really, I don't even think it's good entertainment, but it's out there, and we have to be aware of what's going on with YouTube and other social media platforms. So I started this video with a number of questions, and I hope I provided answers for those questions in an adequate way. But I want to end here with a question, and that's, do YouTube content creators have a responsibility to substantiate claims? And if the answer is yes, to what degree? I'd like to extend my thanks to all the individuals who commented and contacted me about this particular topic and gave me all these interesting questions. I also want to thank the CEO of Betterhelp, Alan Matas, for spending time with me and answering my questions in what I feel was a fairly direct way. And I also want to thank all of my subscribers for their encouragement. Your encouragement allows me to keep creating scientifically informed content. And this journey so far has been, for me anyway, a lot of fun. I hope it's been helpful for you. And I look forward to making many videos about mental health in the future. Thanks again for your support, and thanks for watching.